All right, so we're on. So I see everybody has taken the quiz. So we're good on that. Let me just start with a prayer and then I'll continue. Right? Heavenly Father God, thank you so much for everything that you give to us. Thank you for this week and challenges, of course. Help us to overcome them, God, with your help. Help us to keep our minds focused on you. Pray for our students, watch over them. 3 more weeks left of school before their finals. Just about 2.5 weeks, actually. Watch over them as they prepare for their final. Keep them diligent. Help them be resilient throughout this time. Watch over them on their studies and their families also. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys, good afternoon. Just a couple things before I start, just to remind you. All right, so I haven't looked at the quiz scores or anything like that. I don't know what the averages are for that. I'll take a look at that tonight. There's been a couple of questions about posting quizzes on Blackboard. As I mentioned to you before, I don't like to demonstrate these on Blackboard, but for this one, I'll probably post after all the quizzes are taken. So maybe tonight or tomorrow morning. So you have the answers for them. Because I won't see you guys actually till next Monday. Yeah, because you guys have your exam on Wednesday. So at least with these questions I had on the quizzes, maybe you can look at them and you know what the answer should be. All right, but I can't post that now. I have another lecture section later on today. All right, your exam on
Bideshi,
Wednesday
I
again.
just have a question too.
You go for it.
At the end of the semester, is that when you put it like take out the worst exam and then the
Yeah.
3 exams or the 3 quizzes?
Yeah, I do. So I give you all the quizzes first, and I basically let's just say we have 8. Let's just say we have 9. All right. So you get all the quizzes at the end of the semester. No grades are assessed yet. No final grades are assessed yet. Well, what I do, what I have my grader do, she actually chucks your 3 worst quizzes. So let's just say you took 9 of them. So 3 of them are dropped. Let's just say you got 7 on 3 of them and 10 on the rest. I'll drop your 7. I'll keep the 6 that are 10. So that'd be 60 points. Yeah. Also for the exam, you get to drop 1 midterm. That's if you've taken all, right? So you can drop one of the 4 exams. Your 4th exam will be on Wednesday, of course. Let's just say you got a 40 something on exam 2, and everything else you got 60s and above. We're going to drop exam 2 at the very end. By the way, I'll mention this again at the end of the semester, and I'll actually post information on you to you regarding what's online, what's on Blackboard. I don't delete anything from Blackboard because that's your official scores, but I'll tell you how to calculate your grade and all that stuff. All right, so we do the dropping of the bad quizzes or exams here, so you don't have to worry about that. Are we good?
Thank you.
All right. Other questions?
Yes, Professor. You said that you were gonna post the review for the quiz we just took. Are you gonna go over the quiz we took before today, or are you gonna post those ones as well?
I'll post that too because there's 2 students who are supposed to see me to take the quizzes because they had issues with one with their one is a COVID case and the other was problem with the internet. But I told her to take that quiz last week and that person never showed up. So the deadline's already passed. So I have quiz tonight. Let me make a note for myself. 7 quiz. So you're saying quiz 6. All right. Okay. Let me see my deadlines. Hold on a second, please. I gotta check my deadlines for those makeups for students. 6. All right. I have till about 5 before my next class starts for that person, one person to show up. If not, I'll post that quiz on Blackboard too. All right. Or maybe, you know what? Let's see what happens. In the next, before the lectures end, I'll probably just get the quiz 6 and maybe just talk about that online. All right. But let's just hold off on that for a second. 6 and 7. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
It's about the chapter 16. So
Okay.
I'm looking at the viruses that are related or associated to sensory ganglia, and
Sorry, I missed what you just said.
I was looking at the virus,
Hmm?
like the different kinds of viruses that are associated with sensory neurons and like the sensory ganglia. And
Excellent.
is it all associated with latency because of the retrograde or retrograde movement, something like
Yes.
that?
So here's the thing.
Is that why it is latent?
Yeah. So when a virus is so here's what latency is. You have an infection. In this case, these are viruses, right? And they hang out at sites that your immune system can't attack unless you have an autoimmune disease. So places like the ganglia, for example, you don't expect your immune system to go inside the nervous system to destroy them, right? So they kind of hang out there. They're protected, and then given the right conditions, maybe stress, sometimes with HSV2, what's linked to is the menstrual cycle, actually that produces stress on the system. The immune system is not functioning well, doesn't survey it pretty well. And then, of course, maybe medication, certain medications are linked to this. Like immunosuppressive drugs can be linked to reactivation. But latency is simply this, the virus is there. It's just hanging out and given the right chance, all right? What happens if it pop out again? All right, so you're right. With HSV1 and HSV2, those viruses can hang out in the ganglia. All right?
Does chickenpox use the same mechanics of that?
Yeah, so
Okay.
you're right. Chicken, for example, chickenpox can actually hang out that virus. In fact, all the herpes viruses can be latent. It just depends on where they're hanging out. So with chickenpox, they hang out in the neurons, and then of course they can pop out later on. So the immune system. Imagine somebody had chickenpox when they were 2 years old. The immune system wiped it out, no problem at all. You never see that virus again because you develop immunity. But in some individuals, that chickenpox virus kind of hangs out in the ganglia, in the nervous system. And then given the right conditions, again, it pops out to cause a disease called shingles. So you're right. So both of them, for HSV and for chickenpox, VSV, varicella zoster virus, those viruses can hang out in the nervous system.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Other questions? Before I get started on a very simple chapter, the fungi.
Professor, I know you said that you don't have a date for our final for this class yet, but do you at least
Yes.
know if we're gonna take it before Thanksgiving?
Oh yeah, everything has to be done before Thanksgiving. So school ends on November 24th. What happened? We have to add these classes. So here's the reason why this is done on the official schedule. If you look at the times, there's no time between 2:30 and 3:30 for a typical class, or for the later class from 5 to 6:30. So these were added because there was a request from students to actually increase enrollment. So it's kind of out of the ordinary. I did actually send all that information to the registrar, whoever takes care of this. Actually, it goes to my secretary, or the secretary, not my secretary, but the secretary for the bio department. And then she sends this to the administrators. And right now, that's a good question you ask, because I don't want you to say, hey, 2 days before the exam, this is when it is. Don't worry, but it's not going to be that way. All right. But I would know what those dates are. In any case, we're going to be done really early with lectures. We probably have about a week. So we start fungi today. We're going to finish up fungi today. And then we start parasites next week. So this is week 2. Yeah, we'd be done a week in advance. And then we can schedule that exam even the week before final. All right. So it's not an issue. The reason why I don't have a specific time is because these are unusual time slots for this class and the one later today. I will let you know as soon as I get that information. Are we good?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
I have another one. Sorry.
No problem.
Do you plan to give any quiz next week?
Oh yeah. So here's the thing. You guys have an exam on Wednesday, right? So I don't want to give you another quiz on Wednesday because you have that exam. But I'll be lecturing again on Monday, probably starting parasites on Monday if you get done with this. And this is a very simple chapter, by the way. So maybe next Wednesday we would have a quiz. That would be quiz 8. And I'd like to give one more, so that'd be 2. If you've taken all, you can drop 2. I did say between 8 and 9. It'd be nice if you have 10. I doubt we'd have 10. But even 2 quizzes you can drop. All right? So yeah, I do plan to have more quizzes or quiz.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to, yeah. Other questions I can answer quick?
Yeah, one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
Is our final pretty much going to be formatted just like our midterms and like on Blackboard and whatnot?
Definitely. So there's not going to be a change in the type of format. For example, multiple choice, true, false, mainly multiple choice. Your final exam, of course, is 120 points. So that's why you can't drop the final.
All right, thank you.
Question really quick.
Yeah, go for it.
So you know how I think in AMP2 you said it was going to be quizzes were going to add up to be the final. I think I recall, or like I find exam. Is it going to be like that in this class? Was that this?
Oh, okay. So yeah, what you're referring to is something called an optional exam.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh
Yeah.
my God, I forgot. I'm so sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, no problem. So that was based on all the quizzes that you had, but you guys get to drop one exam. So that takes care. That kind of replaces that.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions? All right, guys, study really hard. This exam on Wednesday should be 2 chapters, right? And again, your slides are the important things. Hopefully you're going back and looking at the videos. I post all the videos on Blackboard. So you have access to that. I kind of highlight the things I really want you to know. Again, names of viruses, disease they cause, symptoms, and specific things about certain diseases. For example, if I say to you, Downy cells, you think about that for a second. Maybe some of you already know the answer, right? Or in fact, we haven't. Yeah, we did see that because we covered that last year, but that's not on this exam. If I said to you Koplik spots, then you should be thinking something. If I say angiogenic tumors on HIV patients, then you should be thinking about something. If I say blueberry muffin syndrome or glaucoma in babies, newborn babies, you should be thinking certain viruses, right? And if I say to you, let me just go through the answers. Koplik spots, of course, you're thinking measles. If I say to you angiogenic tumors, you're thinking on HIV patients, you're thinking Kaposi sarcoma caused by HHV. If I say to you roseola, you're thinking HHV6. All right? Okay. So we're done with viruses. Just one more comment. Your final exam, primarily 3 chapters. Chapters 17, this is the last chapter on viruses we talked about last week. Chapter 18, which is on fungi. And then the final chapter is chapter 19, that's on parasites. And again, maybe 5 to 10% of that exam would be comprehensive. I'm still determining that, but it should be obvious things that you know. So here's what I'm saying. About 90% or more of your final exam is going to be based on these last 3 chapters. All right, today I want to talk about fungi. And I have your objectives back here. Same old story. Names of organisms, disease they cause. Not so much treatments, although I'm going to say a little about treatments today. But those are the things, or very specific things that are associated with them. In fact, let me start this recording session so we have that going. All right. Okay, so fungi, fungal diseases. There are about 200 different fungal species that are associated with humans. They can actually be normal, or they can actually be, let's just say, opportunistic pathogens. Some are really true pathogens. You don't want to have them. But really what we see all the time is about 12. And again, those are the ones I want to focus on, all right? Let me get my pointer back here. So again, most fungi, if you take a look at them, we do harbor some of these in our bodies. And not most of them, but the ones that we can find not in the lungs, but in the oral cavity, in the intestinal tract, sometimes even on the skin. Again, most fungi are opportunistic pathogens. Given the right condition, they can cause disease. So let's look at some very general characteristics of fungi. Again, we're not going to go into detailed biology or say modes of replications for these organisms. Some very few things about them. First of all, if we were to classify them as far as their types, we can say, okay, we have modes of fungi. You've seen these before. Think about a bread that's rotting, right? You see that green stuff on them, maybe fruits, you see green things on them. That's because mold is growing on them. We've all seen that. So they have filamentous growth. I'll show you what filaments look like in a second. Yeast forms are single cellular organisms. So yeast, they kind of look like bacteria on plates, but they're not filamentous. They're single-celled organisms. And then we have this weird category. We have some fungal species that can go in between these. So they're called dimorphics, 2 different forms. All right, and we're going to see examples as we go along. So here's examples of examples. This is of a mold. This one here is Penicillium chrysogenum. This organism actually produces penicillin. That's the antibiotic. Yes, mold produces penicillin. This is what this organism looks like. If you look at it under the microscope, you see these filaments back here, and then these are the fruiting bodies. These are the spores. they can produce another colony like this. Yeast are single cellular organisms. So here's a colony. This is like growing on agar plates. You guys did this in the laboratory. If you were to look at this through microscopes, it doesn't look anything like this. Right, we see these single cells. This is called a budding cell. The bigger one is the base right over here. This is the mother cell, and a new cell is being produced from that. And then we have this category. It goes between molds and yeast. Kind of strange, actually. These are the dimorphic fungi. They tend to be very pathogenic, especially to immunocompromised people, right? So some examples of dimorphics, and I just introduced the concept right now. We're going to see it again later on. Dimorphics, they have two different forms. This is an organism that causes valley fever. It's called Coccidioides immitis. This is what it looks like in the soil. Filamentous, they produce something called an arthrospore and arthroconidia. This is what we can breathe in. And then, of course, that can get into the lung. And here's what it converts to. That's a sphaerium. So this is a dimorphic fungus. All right? Okay, terminology for you. If you're looking at filamentous fungi, in other words, the molds, like what I just showed you here, here's one filament. One filament is called a hypha. Hi, guys. Hello? There's a lot of static in somebody's. Hello?
I make notes, so I'll make my own notes. His PowerPoint's all over the place. So I'll go off.
Hello? Somebody's talking really loud.
Like emphasizes, so I'll, like,
hello?
make, subtitles to like different diseases or.
Okay, guys. Can I have your attention for a second?
And then I'll like write the stuff he wants to know about it. Yeah, and then.
All right, guys. Can you guys listen to me for a second?
It's like he has a lot of external information, and then he'll be like, "Oh, don't worry about this. Don't worry about this."
Guys, okay, if you can turn your volume down a little bit, there's lots of static going on. All right, so I'm picking that up here.
Hello?
Hello? Can somebody say hello? All right. Okay. Okay, guys, so terminology for you. Dimorphic has two different forms. You have the filamentous form and the yeast or the single cellular form, all right? Now, terminology is for you. If you look at the filamentous form, let's just take a look at this one here. One filament is referred to as a hypha. Sometimes you see this on gram stains, by the way, from a report from the clinical microbiology laboratory. So one of these filaments, I would say that's a hypha or hyphal element. Of course, hyphae is plural. This is two or more. Now, if I have a collection of hyphae, I call that a mycelium. So mycelium is just like a mat of these filaments. Right over here, this would be mycelia, all right? So that's plural. So hypha is just a single filament. Hyphae is plural. Mycelium is a collection of filaments. Mycelia is plural. All right, a few other things I'd like to talk before we get into disease. When we talk about bacterial structures, we said, okay, bacterial cell walls are made up of something called peptidoglycan. So that should ring a bell to you. That's peptidoglycan. We don't have peptidoglycan in fungi. What we have is a unique material that you don't find in eukaryotic cells. It's called chitin. So chitin is a material that you find in the cell wall, right? Now, some fungi, if you look at their filaments, these tend to be segmented. These are called septum. A septum is basically a structure that separates two cells, but really they're interconnected. Right over here, so for example, it looks like a little pore, so things can move back and forth through these pores. All right. Now, just pointing out the terms I want you to know. The next term is most fungi is they're saprophytic or saprobic. All that means is that they decompose organic material. So most fungi, not all, they are heterotrophic, meaning they literally feed on organic material. So the basic job of fungi in general, in nature, really is to decompose organic material. All right? Okay. Fungi can grow at different types of conditions and temperatures, but of course the ones that we're going to focus on can grow at body temperature, typically about 37 degrees centigrade. Some fungi, by the way, of course, we used to make food. For example, think about Roquefort cheese. There's this green stuff that you see back here, that's fungus actually growing in that cheese, is called Penicillium roquefort. Of course, this doesn't cause disease. You can consume this, no problem at all. You can use fungi to make bread and wine, fermentation in other words. So again, some fungi can be useful for us. Of course, what we're going to focus on are the pathogenic ones. Just one more slide before I actually get into some basic categories, classification of fungi. Fungi, here's what I want you to know. Fungus can actually reproduce sexually or asexually. You don't have to be able, you won't be expected to identify fungi by their structures, but just keep in mind, when somebody has a fungal culture, let's just say, for example, they have a wound infection and fungi is growing in there, or they have a lung infection, fungi is growing in the lung. You collect a sample, send it to the laboratory. Here's what happens in the laboratory, just to give you a sense. They actually grow those fungi. If it's a mold, it's going to actually form these types of spores. They're called Conidia. And again, I don't hold you responsible for that. So your job is not to identify these things. Just look at the ones that cause disease. But these are structures we can see. And that's how we identify them. Different fungi have different sporulating bodies. And based on these differences, we can actually identify them at the species level. I would not test you on this stuff. That's more for the lab. All right? So again, fungi can produce sexually and asexually. Here's a nice little table. If this is for your interest, if you want to compare fungi, plants, and animals, remember these are all eukaryotes. The only prokaryotes are bacteria and, of course, archaea. I don't test you on this stuff. What I'm trying to focus on, of course, is disease. Now, that brings us to this point. How do we classify fungi? There are 5 major phyla. Right, the first one is called the chytrids. That stands for chytrid mycota. Myco refers to fungi. Mycology is the study of fungi. These are really ancient ones. They tend to be aquatic. Right? They don't cause disease in humans. So these don't cause disease in humans. The other is glomerulomycota. And again, these don't cause disease in humans. Let me just say there's a close association between these and plants. I'll show you a slide later on. All right? The other 3 categories contain species that do cause disease in humans. And by the way, very few species of fungi cause disease in humans. Most are non-pathogenic. We probably come in contact with them all the time. They do not cause us disease at all. So there's one group or one phylus called Zygomycota. They actually form this very strange structure that's called a zygospore. The other groups don't do this. And again, that's a zygospore. This is a sexual state of these types of fungi, Zygomycetes. Put a mark on this one. Most pathogens belong to this phyla here, the Ascomycota. So again, we have species that we can use actually for useful things. For example, making bread. Those are Saccharomyces series species. They don't cause disease in humans. Penicillium, I just showed you Penicillium row 40, we can use to make cheese. But then we have some pathogenic ones. Some that actually can cause disease only given the right conditions. So again, most fungi cause opportunistic pathogens. I listed a few species here, like Flavus and albicans. We are going to come across them in a bit. All right? And then the final category the final phylum is the mushrooms. These are what we call Basidiomycota or Basidiomyces. There are mushrooms we can eat. Of course, there are mushrooms that can be very toxic to us. All right? Lichens. If ever you go to the forest, you see a tree on the trunk, you see these colors look like it's flaking out, like it's scaly, flaking off, little thin strips. Those are lichens. Lichens, what is lichens? Lichen is a mutualistic interaction between these green stuff here, that's algae, they photosynthesize, and then the filamentous stuff here is fungi. All right? Going back to mycorrhizae. These are the glomerulomycota. Take a look at this here. Many fungi actually associated with the tips of plants, the roots of plants. All this little string stuff, this is microscopic, of course. Here's a plant root. This is the very tip. You see that stringy stuff? That's fungi. In fact, about 80% of all land plants actually have this interaction. The fungi actually picks up nutrients and other things for the plant. And of course, the plant provides the fungi with food because plants can photosynthesize. It produces sugars and all that stuff. So nonetheless, this is a mutualistic interaction between 2 groups of organisms. Anyway, those are the different phyla, the 5 phyla. What I want to focus on, of course, said all that stuff to get to this point, is this right here. These are examples of the phylum that contain species that cause disease in humans. And of course, what I'm trying to get to are the very organisms themselves. So really, this is what you're responsible for. Some general terminologies. I mentioned some basic characteristics of fungi. They were all pointed out in red back there. But now I'm trying to get to diseases. And we're going to study these diseases according to the sites of infection, right? So dermatophytosis, phytosis refers to fungal infections. Derma refers to the skin. So I'm going to say a few things about skin infections caused by these fungi. These are the major ones. And here we go again. Those tables, very, very cool. Tells you the name of the disease, the species of fungus involved in those diseases, signs and symptoms. Not so much about treatment, so that's been constant unless I tell you otherwise, and how these things are transmitted, all right? So let's go for the first one. I'm sure you guys all heard about ringworm. I don't like that term because it's not worms that are causing these. The proper term is tinea. All right, so tinea, these are fungal diseases of the skin, but I have the typical term back here, ringworm, because that's used commonly. I don't like that too much. These are not worms, they're fungal disease. You probably heard the word jock itch or athlete's foot. These are the types of diseases we're looking at back here. So the major fungi that cause these diseases are three different genera: trichophyton, microsporin, and then epidermophyton. So tri means three. So here's what's infected, all right? Not deep tissues, not organ systems, but really it's the cutaneous areas, the skin, the hair, and the nails. Right, so those are the sites that are actually attacked by these fungi. Trichophyton 3, they can infect the three different sites, or three different areas: the skin, the hair, and the nails. Microsporin infects the skin and the hair, and then epidermophyton flocosum infects the skin and the nails. All right, so three different groups. If you look at this, many different species for each of these genera. I don't want you to memorize these. If you know these three different genera, that's a first name of a genus species named Trichophyton, Microsporin, and Epidermophyton. They cause fungal diseases of the skin, or tinea, better known as ringworm, but again, I don't like that term, all right? Where do we pick this up? Well, here's what happens. Spores of these organisms, these are the spores, they're present in inanimate objects. Say, for example, the floor, on mats and towels, or maybe on a splinter or something that actually pierces the skin. We have these spores, they get into wounds in the skin, and then they grow very slowly, typically in concentric rings, to produce what's known as tinea or ringworm. So I'll show you a few examples. First of all, let's go through some definitions here. These are clinical terms I'd like you to know. And so let's look at the first one. Tinea, or ringworm, but tinea capitis. Capitis refers to the scalp or the head. So we have infection of the head, which includes the scalp, the eyebrows, and eyelashes. That's tinea capitis. The other is tinea favosa, also known as crusty hair. All right, this is infection from fungi infecting the scalp. Corporis refers to the body. So tinea corporis or corpora. This is ringworm and basically the smooth areas of the body, smooth skin. And I'll show you pictures in a second. Tinea cruris, you've probably heard the term jock itch. This is caused by a fungus, tinea cruris. Unguium refers to fingernails. So tinea unguium is infection of the nails. And tinea barbi, like beard, infection of the beard. Tinea manum refers to manual hand, right? And tinea pedis, this is better known as athlete's foot. This is infection with the feet. So again, these are common terms that we see associated with tinea infections or fungal infections of the skin, hair, and nails. So here's what happens. Imagine somebody has ringworm. How do you diagnose that? Well, you can look at it and you can make an assumption and the doctor gives you some antifungals, right? But typically you collect a specimen, you do a skin scraping, and you take some potassium hydroxide, that's KOH, you add it to the specimen. This is on the slide. Basically kind of removes keratin, it deceratinizes. And what you see back here, these are the filaments. So in this patient, you took a skin scraping, you added potassium hydroxide, and now what you see, these are the filaments. That person has a fungal disease of the skin. This is stained, of course. You can see the filaments here, all right? I want to show you a few examples of each of these categories. Right, so this is athlete's foot, better known as tinea pedis. And you have different grades for them. This is grade 1. This is subclinical and doesn't cause much pain. When it gets to be like this, grade 2 or grade 3, take a look at this one. You can see ringworm, these concentric rings, right? They grow very slowly over time. This is the worst type. It's grade 3. People scratch and they itch, and then you have a bacterial infection, which can be even worse. So this is very painful. And again, this is what we're looking at. All right? Don't worry about the treatments here. That's something you're going to pick up in your other classes when it comes to treatment of microbial disease. But nonetheless, athlete's foot, is called Tinea pedis. These are all examples. You can see this becomes dry and scaly. Fungus is growing. Best example is seen in the grade 3. You have these concentric rings that are formed. They kind of grow slowly. These fungi, they don't grow very rapidly, all right? And they expand on the skin. You can see multiple lesions back there. Take a look at this. All these, you can tell relics are old rings back here. Take a look at this area here. Very, very bad. That can be very painful. It gets worse again when you itch and you get bacteria into these wounds. Now you have a secondary infection. All right, some people, they have allergic reactions to the fungus being on the skin. And I do want you to know the term. It's a clinical condition. It's called dermatophytid. So take a look at this individual. You might have maybe you have infection of the skin somewhere else. Well, what happens on other areas of the body, you can see an inflammatory response. Take a look at this. This is on the fingers. All right, that's inflamed. So against the presence of this, the fungi somewhere on the body, it can induce these reactions somewhere else on the body. So this is called a dermatophytid reaction. It's an allergic reaction to having these fungal diseases. There's some other examples for you. Tinea corporis. Corpora refers to the body. So in this case, we have fungus infection, typically on the smooth areas of the skin. Take a look at this. So here's a kid, the smooth skin areas of the body. All right. Look at all these lesions back here. If I were to ask you, and what can you confuse this? I'm pretty sure you're thinking Lyme disease. Remember the target sign? But with Lyme disease, it spreads, erythema migrans, it spreads. This one takes a longer time to spread. All right? This is Tinea cruris, jock itch. So in athletes in particular who don't wash their clothes, for example, you can have fungi there, and it gets into the skin, and over time you have some really bad infections of the skin. So that's Tinea cruris, or jock itch. This is in the groin area. Tinea unguium. Unguium refers to fungal infections of the nails. Here's the toenail. All right, here's the fingernails. That's pretty bad. So that fungus actually got into the nail bed and into the nail itself to cause this condition. And then we have Tinea capitis. This is infection of the hair. So again, these are terms. You don't have to memorize everything on the slide here, just the different categories, all right? So keep that in mind. That's what you've been seeing on exams. Names of organisms, disease they cause, peculiar things about them. So Tinea capitis is infection of the scalp or the head. And again, you can see some lesions right over here. These are all fungal diseases. Sometimes the hair is actually infected. So you can actually use something called a Woods lamp. You can shine ultraviolet light on them. And then you can see these different forms, all right? So in this case, we have two different categories. Ecto means outside. Ectotrix infection. This is right here. Here's the hair shaft. You can see fungi on the surface. Endo means inside. So this is the hair shaft. Again, you can see fungus inside the hair, right over here. So that's exo and endotrix infection. You can shine this light on them. If it lights up like this, you see this kind of bluish color back here. All right. If it fluoresces, this is called fluorescence. Okay, this is caused primarily by microspora. MICR. This is spelled for microspora. If you don't see any fluorescence, like this is typically caused by trichophyton species. All right, there's other diseases of the skin. I'll just mention a couple of terms. Tinea versicolor and Phthiriasis versicolor. And this is what it's also known as. You can see these lesions here on the skin. This is not really contagious. In other words, other individuals can't get this from someone who's infected. But again, these fungi that causes this problem, these problems, two I want you to know, Malassezia furfur and Pitiospora ovale. All right, so this is Tinea versicolor. Now, candidiasis, you hear about yeast infections in females or oral or vaginal thrush. The organism, the primary one is this Candida albicans. So again, in fact, this is the most common fungus. This is a yeast form, of course, isolated in humans. It's called Candida albicans. So it's a yeast. Let me just say, we probably all have this organism, but it causes an opportunistic infection. You can find it in the oral cavity. You can find it in the vaginal tract. You can find it in the esophagus. Maybe sometimes you can find it in the esophagus and maybe even in the intestinal tract. It's an opportunistic pathogen, simply meaning this: if conditions are right, it can cause disease. So there's some other species back here, like Candida glabrata. If you work in a hospital, you're going to see these species every so often. But the most common one I want you to remember is Candida albicans, yeast infections, all right? So this is what the organism looks like. You see this yeast is budding. Here's the mother cell, the bigger one. Here's the daughter cell being produced. That's called a bud. Sometimes they look like filaments, but they're really not. This is called a pseudohyphae. But nonetheless, generally speaking, it causes opportunistic infection. So I'll show you a few. Here's a baby who's born to a mother with vaginal yeast infection. That's called genital thrush. You see all this white stuff in the oral cavity right here too, on the tongue? That's the organism growing. Okay, this is called oral thrush. In the genital area, in kids or babies who are born or mothers, here you can see fungal infections here too. This is in the esophagus, kind of unusual. We tend to see this in AIDS patients. All right, so your typical individual would not have infections in the esophagus, but AIDS patients, again, they're susceptible to many, many different diseases here. So let me summarize. Candida albicans causes thrush. We all have this organism somewhere hanging out. If you're healthy, it's not much of a problem. If you become immunocompromised or you're very young, you're a baby born to a mother who has a yeast infection in the vaginal tract, then you can have diseases like I'm showing you here, right? Now, other diseases of the skin, one that's not so uncommon is called sporotrichosis. So the organism that causes this, it's a mold. All right, you can see it's growing here on plates. I've actually seen this organism a few times in my practice. It's easy to identify. You just grow the organism until it runs out of nutrients and they form these spores. They look like little teardrops. And that's how we identify them, all right? So what do I want you to know about sporotrichosis? How do you actually acquire this? Typically, somebody's walking in the soil or they're working with rose bushes and that thorn pokes them. And this here, this spore is present in the soil or in that thorn gets into the skin. This is what it starts out like. So you see multiple lesions back here. In this case, the person was working in the rose bush and there was a spore on the thorns. Person got poked and that spore entered. What happens? That spore germinates and now you produce a very nasty disease like this one. So this can be pretty bad, as you can tell, but it gets even worse if bacteria now infects. In other words, you have secondary bacterial infections. All right? Okay, another disease of the skin we don't see too much in this part of the planet. Basically, we see this primarily in tropical and subtropical areas. This problem is called chromoblastomycosis. Chromoblastomycosis caused by many different species. Fonseca, Phylophora, Cladospora. So these are examples of these fungus that cause these diseases. So take a look at this. This person, look at the leg. Fungal disease, right over here. It's very difficult to treat this. There are so many filaments in the skin, in the cutaneous area, subcutaneous area, you can't get rid of this. All right, so when this actually approaches to this level, it's very difficult to take care of. Really what you care about so much is secondary bacterial infection, and that's the most important thing. Again, people can get infected by having wounds contaminated with soil or having splinters, wood splinters, or other things like thorns actually poking the skin. And then, of course, you have this extensive thing that can occur, infection that can occur over time. All right? Okay, so those are the primary disease of the skin. And again, those tables are very helpful to you. And we're just doing a survey of this. Now, the next group of disease I want to focus on, diseases of the respiratory system. This is where they initiate. These organisms can often end up in the bloodstream and go to different sites, including the liver. So again, these are the diseases here I'm going to talk about. Cryptococcosis, histoplasmosis, blastomycosis, coccidiomycosis causes a disease called valley fever or San Joaquin Valley fever, pneumocystis pneumoniae, and then finally aspergillus. I have a couple others at the end. They're very interesting because they produce some really cool chemicals, actually. All right, so let's take a look at this. Again, this is just a survey, all right? So cryptococcosis, a few things I want you to know, and I'm going to name them for you, right? First of all, we can find this organism. This is a yeast. This is what it looks like. This is a negative stain, by the way. Remember, the labs use India ink or nigrosin or Congo red. This is India ink. You collect spinal fluid from an AIDS patient. You do a negative stain or a background stain. These are the yeast that you see, broad base. This is the mother cell and the bud. trust me, that person is going to have this disease. Typically, you see this in AIDS patients. All right. So these organisms are found in pigeon droppings, bird droppings. You can find them there pretty easily. So it's in the soil. The soils can dry up. You can, basically, winds come by, kicks up a storm. You breathe that in, it gets into the lung, or you might get it into a wound. This is what it looks like. So this is cutaneous cryptococcosis, but typically it goes into to the lung, and from the lung it gets into the bloodstream, and from the bloodstream it goes to the spinal fluid. So the specimen of choice, especially from AIDS patient, is spinal fluid. All right, so that's cryptococcosis. Now the others are they're dimorphics, and I'm going to just introduce them to you. All right, so histoplasmosis is caused by Histoplasma capsulatum. And again, if you take a look at this in birds, you can find this in the stool of birds. So I'm going to just show you some slides and just summarize it by saying just a couple of things. Same thing here for this one, blastomycosis. You can find this in bird droppings, just like we saw for cryptococcosis. So those three, cryptococcosis caused by Cryptococcus neoformans. We have histoplasmosis caused by Histoplasma capsulatum. And then blastomycosis caused by Blastomycosis dermatitis. What do I want you to know about these organisms? Common thing about them, you can find them in bird droppings in the soil. All right. Histoplasma, it's a dimorphic fungus. This is what it looks like when you grow it in the lab at room temperature. And this is what it looks like when you grow it in the human body. So it's a yeast form. These are yeast forms here. All right. You see the same thing for blastomycosis caused by Blastomyces dermatitis. When you go to room temperature or 28 degrees centigrade, it's filamentous. And of course, when it's growing in the body at 37 degrees, it's a yeast form. So these are dimorphic fungi. All right. Now, cocci is common around this area, basically in deserty areas, the desert belt or the sun belt, as we call it. So you have California, the Central Valley. All right. We have Mexico, northern Mexico. Some places in South America, Nevada, Arizona. So here's what happens. This organism that causes this disease, coccidioidomycosis, is called Coccidioides immitis. This is the primary species back here. There's another species that's called Coccidioides posadacea. So here's what happens. Basically, let's take a look at the life cycle. You have the organism in the soil. So this is the filamentous form, all right? At some point, they run out of nutrients, and what you have is a structure called an arthrospore. An arthrospore, this is a spore. It's very resilient. I imagine some breezes come by, kicks this up from the soil, and then you breathe it in. So what happens, this arthrospore gets to the lung, and then it kind of converts to something called a spherule. So this is also a dimorphic fungus. Filaments at room temperature of the soil, and spherules, this is taken from a biopsy from the lung. This is the same organism, all right? Except this is at 37 degrees centigrade. What you see at room temperature would be the filamentous form, okay? Just to show you where these organisms are. Typically, this is where we see them. California, this is the Central Valley. Coccidioides, also called San Joaquin Valley fever. You probably heard that term before, Central California. And this is the other area here. So you see, these are all deserty areas. Than here in South America. But primarily, you see most cases right here in California, Nevada, Arizona, and northern Mexico. All right. But note on this, the infective stage is this one here, the arthrospores, right over here. Arthrospores, they're present in the soil. You breathe this in, get into the lung. All right. Now, another fungus is called Pneumocystis jirovecii. And again, here's a point I want to make. You being healthy, would never get probably would never be infected with this organism. It's quite common, by the way. But generally, here's what I want you to link. Remember, I said most fungal diseases are opportunistic. The primary problem we see is in AIDS patients. So again, this is taken from a lung, sputum in the lung. This is a very special stain. You would never have something like this if you're healthy. But if you're immunocompromised, basically, you see tons of the pathogens in the lung. And actually can cause death. You know, AIDS, you guys are pretty young, but HIV/AIDS came big time on the scene in the early 80s. And there were two things. We didn't know about the virus. We didn't know what it was to begin with, right? But there were two things patients with AIDS had. First of all, they had Kaposi sarcoma. Do you guys remember that one caused by a virus? This is HHV8. human herpes virus. It causes those lesions on the skin, those angiogenic tumors on the skin. We talked about that before. And the other disease would be this, pneumocystis pneumonia. So again, here's a person who's demonstrating these signs, Kaposi sarcoma, and then pneumocystis pneumonia. That person was defined as an AIDS patient back then. All right? Okay, I want to just mention a few other species, and then we're done. So Aspergillus, right over here, causes a disease called aspergillosis. We'll talk about the major species. There are many different species of Aspergillus, but these are the important ones. The biggest one is this one here, Aspergillus fumigatus. When I say the biggest one, this is one that's involved with really nasty diseases of the lung, primarily in older people. Now, notice the term, it's also one of the causes of farmer's lung disease. That tells you a whole lot. So here's an older individual working in the land, all right, maybe the garden or whatever, or in his field, the spores are present there. He picks this up, that spore gets to the lung, and now you have a very nasty lung disease. In fact, check this out here. This is called an aspergilloma. This is just like a fungus bore in the lung itself. Very, very nasty. And this can spread, by the way, especially in HIV patients, AIDS patients, immunocompromised patients, and older people. You typically pick this up from the soil, the spores from the soil. This is a stain sample. This is the same thing as we're looking at back here. All right? This is the fungus. You can see the filaments growing in the lung. This is what it looks like when you go into the laboratory. Very easy to identify. Tends to be very green in color. And when you put it under the microscope, these are the spores. They're called conidia. Again, I don't care that you know all that stuff, but this is how we identify it in the laboratory. So Aspergillus fumigatus is one of the major causes of farmer's lung disease. Produces occasionally these aspergilloma. Generally, you see these types of filaments in the lung. You see this primarily in older individuals or people with HIV/AIDS, immunocompromised patients. Again, opportunistic. All right. There's another Aspergillus species. In fact, this one here. So parasiticus too, but especially this one is called Aspergillus flavus. What do I want you to know about this one? These organisms, especially this one here, they can infest grains. Think about corn. Think about wheat. Think about rye. Think about barley. All right. Take a look at this. All that green stuff is this organism growing here. So what? So here's the thing, right? As the organism grows, it produces a toxin. This is what I want to remember. It's called an aflatoxin. In fact, there are many different variations. This is one of the most potent one. It's called aflatoxin B1. Basically, this is not causing an infection in your tissue, right? You're consuming corn or other grain stuff that contains this toxin if the organism grows on that thing. Say for example, here, that's pretty nasty, right? My people, I'm going to wash this out and I'm going to, no, don't do that, because if it's this organism, by the way, other fungi look green too, Penicillium, other Aspergillus species, they have this green color, but you don't want to take a chance because if you have a very significant infection of this here, you're producing a lot of this chemical. So what? Well, what happens, this chemical can go to the liver and it can induce, is carcinogenic, all right? So depending on how much you consume, you can end up with problems in the liver, primarily in the liver. So it's a carcinogen. So what I want you to know about Aspergillus flavus in particular, it produces aflatoxins. It can grow on grain stuff like corn. As it does, it produces this nasty chemical that has a potential, given the right concentrations, to induce cirrhosis of the liver and or carcinoma, which is cancer of the liver, right? There's another one. This is called Paracoccidioides brasiliensis. Again, it's a dimorphic fungus because this is what it looks like. The yeast phase, very easy to identify. It looks like a little mariner's wheel. In fact, I think I have, right over here. So this one is, there's no other fungus that can do this. So here's a person who has an infection right here in the nasal passages. You can even go deeper into the respiratory passage. You do a scraping, and this is what you would see, like a mariner's wheel. You can diagnose this. You see this primarily in South America. So think about the term Paracoccidioides brasiliensis. All right? Brazil, South America are more common out there. Now, the last fungus on the list is this one here. It causes a disease in plants, actually. That disease is called ergotism. So the organism is Claviceps purpurea. So this is what it is. And again, typically it grows on grain like rye. So you can see right over here, that's a fungal disease. So what? I mean, we're not these plants, right? But we consume the plants. And here's the cool thing about this fungus. I guess it's not cool. They produce chemicals, this fungus, Claviceps purpurea, produce chemicals that look like LSD. Or you guys know about LSD, lysergic, it's called acid also. It can be used as a psychedelic drug. Lysergic acid diethylamide, that's LSD. So we have all these derivatives. They're called alkaloids, by the way. They're toxins, so they're called ergotoxins. The disease is called ergotism. Again, the organism is Claviceps purpurea. So again, this can be toxic to us. By the way, we can use some of these chemicals to make pretty cool drugs we can use clinically. For example, ergometrin, right here. All right? Basically, we can use this drug to induce contractions, uterine contractions for childbirth. You can use this you can actually use the drug. In this case, I think it's a bad thing, to induce abortions, all right? And you can even stop bleeding after childbirth. Why? Because it causes constriction of muscles and, of course, blood vessels too, all right? So again, ergotism caused by Claviceps purpurea produces LSD-like chemicals. They're called alkaloids. And again, we can use some of these for medications. And lastly, we have the mushrooms. All I want to say about this, there are mushrooms you can eat. Those are caprinus, so this is the edible forms. But of course, I don't care about that one. We have some other mushrooms that produce some very nasty toxins. And top of the list here is one called Amanita. So you see this species here, Amanita phyloides. Sometimes they can look alike. People misidentify them when they eat them, and then they can die or they can have some major problems with the central nervous system or the liver because these mushrooms are producing toxins. All right? And again, I'm not going to expect you to memorize all these toxins, but here's a few for you. Amanitin, phytotoxins. So these are examples of toxins that can affect the liver or the respiratory system. Okay? All right. So those are the major fungi. I told you it's going to be a very short lecture. All I want you to be able to do is correlate the names of the organisms, disease they cause, and peculiar symptoms, signs and symptoms. Really, that's it. When it comes to drugs that we use to treat them, so here's a nice little table for you. How do we classify them? Well, here's all I want you to know. Most of the antifungals, I have this here in yellow. They bind to stuff in the fungal cell walls, chemicals in the fungal cell walls of the cell membranes. Most of these actually bind to sterols. That's what I want you to remember. So these are in the fungal cell membrane. These drugs, when they bind, they interrupt membrane function, and then these fungi can actually die. All right? So these are examples for you. You will learn about them in pharmacology when you're in the nursing program or other programs, but I'm going to have you memorize all of them here. This is not something for you. The last drug I do want you to know a little about is called griselfulvin. We can use this primarily to treat tinea infections, ringworm infections. And I do want you to know just the basic mechanism. You guys probably have seen a slide that when cells divide, undergo mitosis, the chromosomes line up and all that stuff. But you guys probably know this. There's a structure called a spindle fiber that pulls the sister chromatids apart. Again, that's more basic biology. All I want you to know about this drug, it disrupts the production of these fibers. These are called spindle fibers. And again, if you don't have them, you can't separate your chromosome. Well, imagine there's a fungal cell, you treat that person, there's a fungal disease, let's just see off the skin, use griselfulvin, here's what happens. These filaments don't work. The cells can't replicate and the fungus dies. All right? So that's it for fungus. Very short chapter. Again, what's really important is what I have on the tables. All right? Names of these species, disease they cause, not so much on treatments. All right? Okay, guys, we're done with fungal diseases. When you come back next Monday, we're going to start parasites. So we have about maybe 2 lectures on parasites, and then we're done with all the official materials.